Oh, awesome.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out to Startup Boston Week, especially on our last day. My name is Ashley Johnson, and I'm one of the organizers for this event. Welcome to one of our last sessions today, and to really round out Startup Boston Week, early stage equity, what to consider before allocating equity. While we wait for people to kind of navigate around a bit, just a few quick reminders. We really love questions, so please use the Q&A tab on the far right of your screen to submit any questions you may have during this session. We also have an awesome social media competition floating around. You'll want to pay attention to what our speakers are saying and then post an awesome quote on social media from them using the hashtag SBW2021. You'll then be entered to win one of 5 $100 gift cards to a Black-owned Boston business. All right, everyone, enjoy. I'm going to turn it over to Sid right now.
All right. Well, thank you, Ashley. I am super excited to be here. Thank you, everyone who is joining this session today. I know this is one of the last sessions, so I appreciate you taking the time on a Friday. My name is Sid Desai. I'm the founder and CEO of Rocket Wellness. Just in a nutshell, we are actually building digital therapeutics that uses virtual reality and mobile apps for cancer patients to help them with their cancer distress. And today we've got an amazing kind of panel here for you guys. We've got Clement Cazelot, who I think a lot of you probably know him from Techstars Boston. He now works for a company as a machinery partner as COO. And we've also got Jason Furtado. I hope no relation to Nelly Furtado. And he runs a company, Shoebox, which is a platform to help startup companies kind of manage their entire corporate legal activity. I'll let them introduce themselves in just a bit, but just to give you guys a heads up, we all know that startup is a living, breathing entity, right? There's really many decisions a founder makes early on in their startup journey, in their life cycle, that actually impacts the company's flow, financial well-being over time. And one of these decisions is allocating equity. It's really the only instrument that you can use early on to attract early hires, including co-founders or employees. Unless you've got a stack load of money in the back and you can pay them. That's the only way for you to attract people. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. As I mentioned, we've got 2 amazing founders for you, both of them who've got tons and tons of experience in the startup world. So let them each give a quick 30-second introduction, and we'll get right into the questions. So Jason, do you want to get started?
Sure. So I'm Jason Furtado, founder and CEO of Shoebox. It's a platform that helps companies from incorporation all the way through to exit and beyond, with our recent partnership with Fidelity Investments to manage your equity and corporate records and make sure that you get off to a fast start and continue to grow and scale.
Awesome. Clement?
Hey everyone, great to see everybody here. So my name is Clement Cazelot. I was, as Sid mentioned, the managing director of Techstars in Boston, invested in close to 180 companies through Techstars personally, and so I've seen a lot of cap tables from the inside, and so that's where the part I'll share. I've also been a founder. I'm now again in the founder seats right now, having 6 open recs, giving equity to people, deciding where to do, growing the company to 30 people over the next few months. So that's so a lot of equity discussion. So I'll share my experience both as from the investor side as well as from the founder side, sharing truly what is this stuff called equity and how to look at it, given that there is so much potential when speaking about equity.
That's awesome. Thank you, Clement. So why don't we start off with that question? You mentioned you recently kind of, you founded many companies in the past. You've funded many companies in the past. But as a founder, when do you think when should one hire, or receive the title of a co-founder or a core team or a founding team? And how do you manage allocating equity to somebody in this position?
That's so there's multiple questions here. So I'll start just on the founder, founding team, co-founder, and the implication. So being a founder is not a job title. So it's just you signed up for a lot of pain and a lot of joy in the roller coaster. So the one thing that I see a lot of folks being hung up on the early days is who is a co-founder, who is that person who gave up who gave up just around the title, like who is a founder, who is not a founder. The reality is when you're 100 people and more, now all the 10 first people, 20 first people are part of the founding team. So that like co-founder thing starts to erode over time, and its importance erode over time. The one thing, however, that comes alongside founder is usually a certain expectation around ownership. And so that is important. When you're providing the title of founder of not founding team members, all the first 15 employees should be called founding team members, but there is an expectation around equity, and there is no right and wrong answer. It's truly whatever gets the other person excited, and we'll speak with Jason a lot about vesting, a lot about the cliff, protections to not as you're still in the ideation phase. But the short is we'll speak numbers in a little bit, but anyone who is ready to commit can take a risk. Like you hire people for skills, you fire them for behaviors. It's the same thing for founders. So you hire them for skills complementary, but you stop working because of behaviors and not being able to do that. So in the early days, everyone that is willing to drop everything they do to come into this crazy adventure together is to some extent a founder. Don't be too hang up on that, while not setting the wrong expectation where early employees having clear expectation. Here, right. I'll pass that on to Jason and we'll speak more about the mechanics of equity split, 50-50, what's good, what's not, in a little bit.
Yeah, Jason, your journey with Shoebox started in 2013. How did you go about hiring your first kind of co-founder, if you have one, and how did you kind of navigate that journey of allocating equity?
Yeah, so I think it definitely depends on what you're trying to achieve, and finding, based on what you're trying to go after, what are the special pieces that you need to bring together, what's going to be important, and thinking a little bit longer term, who's that core group that you're going to lean on, because they're the ones that are taking on that early role, and they're going to be kind of who people are going to look to a certain extent as you grow and scale, as to what the core of your company is and what it's about. Mm-hmm. I think it's a good point from Clement that there's an equity component, an expectation to that as well. It's 50. Some people always talk about, should it be 50-50? Should it be 70? Whatever the hell. And it really comes down to what's going to get people motivated, but also what do they bring to the table and how unique is that, which is hard to say. One way I like to think about it is when I go to raise money, isn't going to make sense to an investor. When they look at the cap table and they think about the allocation of equity, what is this person bringing to the table? How unique is it? Does it make sense for their contribution or ongoing contribution and their commitment? If somebody is coming in and they're only going to, hey, I'm going to see what happens. I'm only going to put in 50% of my time, but later I'm really going to care. Right. You should give them equity based on the commitment they're willing to make, not based on something that they're going to say later. You're setting up the allocation based on what they're committing to and what they're going to bring to the table. And then you have things like vesting to make sure that if they don't bring that to the table, or they decide to leave early in the journey, then they're only going to get a portion of that original, based on that original commitment. Yeah. I don't know if you have any comments on that.
There's a massive book that I would recommend to everyone on that specific topic. It's called The Founder's Dilemma from Noah. His last name is escaping me. I'll put the link into the chat in a little bit. The short is, equity, when you do not have cash, equity is a way to reward people for their commitment. On the investor side, great point, Jason, on the framework. When I used to see people arriving to me, it's hey, here is CEO, CTO, Chief Product Officer, and then looking at, okay, the CEO owns 90% of the company. The CTO owns 3% of the company. And then the person who is supposedly product king, but is actually never here, not even full-time, on 7%. I'm that looks like a dysfunctional team. Right. So the reason why investors are asking of the cap table, it's not to who owns what, is this equity split a good reflection of the involvement of everyone and their contribution to the company.
So what I'm hearing is the cap table component is really important to get it kind of sorted right in the early stages. How do you recommend a founder kind of get started on that? Do you need something formal, or you can just whip up an Excel sheet and start putting things together?
I'll jump in here. I definitely write it down. Like it should be legal documents. It should happen as soon as possible. There are tools like Shoebox and other tools that are out there that can help automate that stuff. And there are standards and form documents that are focused on the startup community that can help put that in place. You want to get IP agreements in place. If you're building a company, you're building it because you believe it's going to succeed. And that conversation only gets harder over time. The longer you wait, the harder it's going to be to have some of those discussions, especially as you start to gain value up front. You should get those commitments. You should put down in writing what you're actually going to do and move forward from there. It doesn't have to be like a huge undertaking that takes thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to get off the ground. You just want to get a basic foundation in place, make sure you protect what you're going to put your time into and what these other folks are going to put their time into, and make sure everyone's on the same page as to what their commitments are.
Right. And Clement, have you ever seen, is there such a thing as an ideal cap table, or that's just a dream and it varies depending on the situation of a startup?
So at the seed stage, yes, you'll hear the term. Let's start by the perspective of what's not good and then to walk back. So there is the concept of damaged cap table. A concept of damaged cap table, there is only 100 points that you'll ever have. You create shares, everything, but there's only 100 points. And so there is a concept of dead equity, which is when you allocate equity to someone that now is not part of the company anymore. And so if you, let's say you're very common situation, you're 3 people, you start a company together, everyone has 30%. And then you decided to not apply any sort of vesting, any sort of cliff, which I used to see, unfortunately, more often than it should be. By the way, vesting and cliff is the idea for everyone. So vesting is the idea that you're granted 30%, 50% of the company. However, you access these shares only over time. Usually they're 4 years, 5 years, 6 years for founders, depends. But so on the 4 years vesting, which is traditional for employees, then you get access to 25% of everything every year. Meaning if you have 50% of the company, you leave after 1 year, you only get 25% of this 50%, i.e. 12.5% that you would leave with. When there is no agreement, when there is like only a handshake, or like when like lawyers who are not used to work with startup are putting things together, that 3 co-founders, one with 33% that decides to leave after a year and a half, leaves with a third of the company. That third is now dead. This is a dead equity. This is a weight that is coming on, that when investors are funding, they are making that person rich. That is unfortunately not part of the company anymore. And so that could be a trigger, because what is projected is you didn't know how to manage your ownership. I, as an investor, I'm coming and buying ownership. If you don't know how to protect your personal ownership, you won't protect mine. That's an oversimplification, but that's a short of what is being said when someone sees a damaged cap table.
Right.
Or investors who own too much at a too early stage, all that type of stuff. So
so if a vested employee ends up leaving, Clement, how do you manage that as a founder? You know, you have somebody who's been in the company, has helped you for a year, and they have a certain percentage of the shares vested, and then now they're leaving the company. They're taking that. Is that considered dead equity, in your opinion?
Yes and no. With some is as a founder, whenever you give equity to someone, you should feel comfortable with that person if they leave after a year, that they leave with that amount of equity. If you do not feel comfortable with that, let's hope for the best but plan for the worst, then that probably means that you gave a stock grant that is too high. There is a lot of comp out there. The reality is every company is unique and should be treated as such, because some of these comps are based off companies that just raised 5 million as a seed round. Others, they raised 200,000 as a seed round. And unfortunately, they're all merged together in terms of data. So it's about getting the levels that motivate the person and the level that you would feel comfortable if that were to become dead equity. Also, you're not working for that.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Jason, in your journey, what are some of the kind of key things that you discovered that, if you wish you had a magic lamp or something, you could have done something different in your startup journey as an allocating equity?
I actually feel pretty good about what we did, but if I look but I had a lot of guidance, right? I had really great mentors and early investors that were basically hawks around some of these issues. That's also because of what I'm doing, and they care a lot about that stuff. If you're building a platform around equity management, you better have a good understanding of some of these concepts. But I do get pretty, I guess, frustrated to a certain extent, even though I'm not sure that's the best word. When we work with a lot of different companies, and it bothers me when people make some of these common mistakes when they go into that split of equity, and they don't write down the paperwork. They got some advice that, hey, it's still early, let's just figure this out, we'll see what happens. That I remember Clement in a previous conversation that we had around like companies that are just finding documents on the internet or just using an Excel sheet or something like that, where they're just using docs that are inappropriate. They're not leveraging, they have either bad counsel or not leveraging counsel to get that advice. Like having a good attorney early on is incredibly important. I always caveat it that it's like using attorneys to set up form documents and collect signatures is the worst possible use of your early stage capital. That being said, you need that high value advice. So right. Figuring out how to leverage these incredibly valuable resources to make sure you're making good strategic decisions, like talking through equity splits or making sure that the vesting's appropriate, making sure the documents or the platform that you're using has appropriate legal controls is right. Incredibly important. But making sure that you put that foundation in place as early as possible, making sure that you actually document the relationships you build. I've had people like hire folks, not have any documentation except as an email that says, hey, I'll give you 2% of the company. Don't ever do that. You got to give people a specific number of shares. Like 2% of the company means 2% of the company. Sometimes they could argue forever. Like these are all just things people don't think about, but they need to have these conversations. They need to make sure that they're supporting what they're doing. I think too many people don't spend the couple hours it takes to actually understand what a cap table is, what they're actually agreeing to, what stock options are, like how this works at all. And they just pass it across almost like it's a black box to the attorney. I don't have to think about it. My attorney's dealing with it. That I find is the biggest mistake that I see. Like that's a really bad, at the end of the day, you're going to get paid out on the equity. All the work that you're doing, if you don't put this foundation in place, it's not rocket science, but if you don't pay attention to it and you just pass the buck, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage. Investors do this all day. You don't. Like spend a couple hours and learn it.
Yeah, that's a very valid point, Jason. As a founder myself, I've been in situations where things I have not understood, I've personally made mistakes on. So you mentioned something about stock options. So how do you kind of allocate that? Do you include stock options as a kind of line item in your cap table? How do you go about that?
Yeah, you have a stock incentive plan, right? And you got to talk about that with your investors as you start going on how big that should be. But you need to incent people with equity. You want them to be bought in for the long term, not just based on the comp they're in. That's true early on, as it is further along down the line. We're a 40-person company, equity is still an important component, of course. Like you want them to be bought into the vision. You want them to help you build a company that's going to have staying power long term and be invested in the success of the business. So thinking about stock options, trying to figure out what's going to be fair, and talking to folks like Clement that are involved in a lot of companies to make sure that what you're proposing is reasonable. Yeah. Your attorneys will also have a perspective, trying to make sure that you're aligned with what market is a good baseline.
I see Clement there with a Sharpie on his hand, so I'm asking a question.
So we went and we are at a third stage of equity right now. I'll indulge me everyone 90 seconds so that you have the visibility of everything, because we spoke about founder equity, we then spoke about founder equity, employee equity, investor equity, and how does all that work for 1 second. So there is always 100 points. However, you keep giving, and then hey, Shoebox is 40 people, keep giving equity. So the idea is basically at the start, like when we were speaking earlier about splitting between founders, we were speaking about this early part. There is 100 points. There's like founder A, founder B. What is a good split? That's literally like the base. Then what is happening? Then we're discussing about employees. Well, the early employees, not necessarily founders, getting options. There is something called option pool. Well, the reality is you're not actually taking shares from anyone and adding. Everyone speaks about dilution. What dilution is means you're adding more shares. So this 100, actually, we're going to add 10% shares. So we're 10% option pool. There are now 110 shares, but in itself, they still only do 100%. And so that's how equity works. You give stuff to people, and then you add shares on top, and in itself, that creates a new total. And so that's what we're speaking about all the time. So the reason why Jason was earlier saying 2% is a bad idea, and speaking a percentage is always a bad idea, because are you speaking about 2% of that first bucket or that second bucket? And then you start adding investors, you start adding other people, and what are you speaking about? And so that's when saying, like, and you're on this session in order to learn about all that. So we're trying to carry all this, is spend time to understand what are we speaking about and what is happening. There is, at the founder stage, it is good, as long as it makes sense and it reflects the involvement of everyone. If someone takes zero salary and someone takes some salary and equity, it's good to have different way to split. I split with my co-founders 60-40. I have 40, my co-founder has 60. My co-founder, before starting this company, I spent 2.5 years maturing the idea until I arrived to help scale the company. That's our split, 60-40. So then we started adding employees, 10% option pool. Then we started adding investors. You start adding stuff, and that's what we're speaking about. And when you speak about employees, you're speaking about stuff that comes from that bucket itself.
So is that the standard, Clement, the 10% is what you should set aside as an equity pool, or that percentage kind of changes every now and then depending on your use case?
So the second you understand, there is a second book that I recommend everyone to read called Venture Deals by Bradfeld. Like, there's a lot of Techstars stuff in it, so I'm slightly biased, but the short is your option pool is whatever you need to incentivize people in the future. 10%, 15%, 20%. The things that blew my mind the day I understood that. The option pool is another way to speak about the value of your company.
Right.
So because the option pool, so for instance, for an investor, just finishing on that very briefly, your option pool, yes, the short answer, Sid, 10% is about the norm for a seed Series A company, and then that starts to taper down. The reality, I hear all this, I have like Techstars, a lot of founders, so good, I got this 10 million pre-money term sheet. I love it. However, they want me to have a 20% option pool because we have so many great people. What you just said is you basically have $8 million term sheet because people said, hey, founders, equity, but then I want you to have 20% after. So after everything happens, I create a new bucket that is the option pool. So the options is the size of the option pool is just another way to speak about price and to adjust price, because the person eating the dilution of the option pool is whomever was before.
Right.
So yeah, 10% is standard, and understand what that means. The option pool is just another variable to speak about price.
And you know, to kind of add on to that, there's often some confusion in a lot of founders amongst, like, you know, terms like common shares versus stock options versus restricted stock units and stuff like that. Could you both, either of one of you, help us understand like what the difference is between these three things?
Yeah, I can take a shot at it, but this is also an area where there's tons of things written. Like I threw on a blog post about dilution that we've written. There are lots written about these concepts. So definitely encourage folks to follow up if you're trying to figure it out. So we talked a little bit about there's 100 points total. That 100 points can be broken up in different ways, and there's different securities or types of equity that you can grant. Generally, it's about like what the tax and when you pay for the shares, and that's generally some of the big triggers between, like, restricted stock is the actual stock. You own it and you'll have that going forward. And that's your founder shares. People talk about founder shares and actually you got a restricted stock grant or whatever. It's all restricted. That's all ends up being restricted stock. There's not magic founder shares versus other people's shares unless you're creating multiple classes of stock, where the classes of stock have different things that go into the waterfall. There is some complexity here, but there's common stock options. Generally, founder stock is also going to be common stock. Preferred stock is generally what investors get, and there are protections for preferred stock because they're actually putting cash into the company. So they would get paid back first, either with a multiple or whatever, but there are protections depending on if you were to get acquired, who gets paid back first, second, and third. That goes to the concept of a waterfall. So I'm giving you search terms for everybody that you could Google some of these different concepts to really dig into it. But if you're thinking about common stock specifically, which is what the founders generally will get, the stock option plan will be a reserved part of will be common stock as well. Stock options is the option to later buy. Restricted stock means that they're granting you the shares, you need to pay for them right now, versus an option means that later on you can buy them.
Right.
If they're exercise options, you can exercise them right away, but you could wait and then only exercise what's vested, and there are tax implications. So there's more to this. There's more to it, but like thinking about from that 100 points, what are you giving to folks? Yeah. Leveraging the resources that are out there to learn more about these concepts, having a good attorney to think about what the appropriate security is to grant. I can't say enough how important it is to spend a couple hours on these concepts, read some of the blog posts, talk to folks about these concepts, because it's more complicated than folks want it to be to understand it in like a 10-minute session. But it's also not a PhD thesis that is unaccessible to the smart folks that are starting companies.
Right. Now Clement, go on.
Before we jump on the Q&A, I'll share a personal story about almost 7 years ago. I sold my first company that had been the founders a little bit more. 9 years ago, I sold my first company. The fact that I did not look into tax, the day you're selling, you're doing all that to sell your company. You're not looking into tax until it's too late, then it's actually too late. I made two fundamental mistakes. I never looked into taxes. That costed me about $500,000 that I overpaid because I hadn't filed the right thing at the right time when I was a founder. It's called 83B, election. There are like plenty of stuff actually being friendly. Anyway, and if you're a foreigner, please by all means look even deeper because there's so much nuance. And the second piece is I hadn't given enough shares to my employees, and I had given them at prices that were different from the acquisition price. Ended up like what I thought I was giving $200,000 to someone. Turned out actually they only received because they were abroad because like only $80,000. And so these are like things that I could have fixed so easily if I had talked to my lawyer from the get-go and told to my lawyers that I had no idea what I was doing, and please spend the time to educate me. And so these are real issues that happen to every single company until it's too late. That's the later. At the early stage, don't make it complex, make it super straightforward. Have a simple equity split. Don't try to do a Zuckerberg or like something where you hear about these founders controlling their company. Great, there are the outliers. Do things that are simple and read a book. That's all.
Yeah, I can't say that. People come to us and they're like, I want to create some preferred founder stock or all these crazy structures. And I'm like, you're wasting your time. Like you do need to focus on building your business. This complexity that you're adding is unlikely to matter. You should focus on the issues around taxes, around making sure that you actually own your equity, that your equity split is appropriate, that you've thought about some of the tax implications, and work with attorneys that do this all day and try to keep it simple. Like you're not getting into starting a company to do financial engineering unless you are. If that's not your game, then focus on what's important, follow the yellow brick road of what's kind of standard and normal, so you can make sure that you actually understand your company, can truly own your company, both in equity and in actually understanding what you've agreed to when you go to an investor. You can actually engage in that discussion and feel like you're having an open discussion around what the negotiation terms are. And I will actually go back to Clement's point around venture deals. We actually at Shoebox have everybody in customer success and encourage all our engineers to read that book. It's such a great foundation, not just around the topics, but also what is the investor's perspective and what are they going to think about? What should be the entrepreneur's perspective and what should they think about? It's such a great foundation to kind of go to better understand some of the dynamics that'll be in play.
Yeah, we'd love to have you post that book name in the chat box, Jason. There's a question from the audience here. Prakash is asking, what method of valuation is most appropriate as an early startup with no insight into cash flow? What's your advice on valuation, assuming we need an angel investor or have to give up a certain portion of an equity? So I guess the question is on valuation. How do you value your startup at this early stage?
Do you mind? I'll jump on that. Like I've had this conversation. So your company is worth nothing, but what the market, and my company is worth nothing, but what the market is ready to pay for it. That would be like your worth. We are all running private companies that have like regardless seed, pre-seed, all that. Like we're worth what the market is ready to pay for it. Then there are comparables, which is your pre-seed, like the earliest money, should cost you about 10% plus minus 5%, and every subsequent round should cost you about 20% plus minus 5%. This is a general comp. So the most used way to value, so we closed a $4.5 million seed round like in August. Like we had to go through this valuation exercise. It was genuinely that simple. It says, how much do you need to get to the next step? In our case, 4.5 million. Cool. You have a certain background, all that, cool. That's like 4.5 million, then that's going to be a 20% about of the company. Like in our case, 22.5%. So that means our post money was 20 million, and we had like 4.5 million being injected. That's genuinely how that worked. And before getting there, we had a first discussion. Hey, let's raise 800,000. Let's raise 1.5 million. Let's raise 2 million. And how the round was getting together, the round became bigger. And then we end up on the final numbers to still stay in this 20%. And some people were not happy, ended up not investing. And some people were super happy, they ended up investing and wanting to invest even more. Yeah. So that's how you value a startup. It's what the market is ready. Don't be greedy. Just stay in this bucket of ownership.
And the size of the opportunity is going to matter there, right? Like the investors are going to be interested if the size of the opportunity is big enough, if the team has the appropriate skill set and can position themselves and show that they can do it. Mm-hmm. And the dollar amount makes sense for what they're trying to achieve for that potential value at the end of the day, then there's something to talk about. And if there's an investor that's willing to pay it, then you're going to end up with $1 million to go after the opportunity.
Yeah, this go on, Clement.
If you're at the angel stage, hey, if I heard that right, I have a very first angel. How do I price it? So there is like convertible note or safe. Like, by the way, please work with a lawyer. If you decide to not work with a lawyer, then use the safe of the box. Don't use anything else. And the short is a company in Boston with just an idea for the first 200,000 each that they are bringing are worth, if nothing exceptional, between 3 to 5 million. For the first like pre-seed-ish seed day, and they are like there is a wide band that's like that can go much higher and somewhat lower, but anything lower than 3 million seems to be off in the tech market. Anything higher than 5, 6 million, although you will hear about it in the news, it's about like, can you justify that, and do you have people that are good with it? And if the answer is yes, then congratulations, you get
Clement's also highlighting another point, which is like there are different vehicles to get money into your company. A safe or a convertible note, you're generally delaying that valuation, and you're trying to get either for a friends and family round or whatever, you're trying to get capital in to prove that you can go do something or get a little bit further along with some proof points so someone feels more comfortable valuing your company from a lead perspective on the investor side.
And so, Jason, talking about convertible notes and safes, do you think these are added onto your cap table as a line item? Let's say if you have 5 convertible notes with 5 different investors, does this mean there are 5 line items in your cap table?
Yeah, they're in the cap table. There's dollars. The cap table includes dollars. Those will convert. Those terms will matter. When someone's doing the cap table math, doing their next round or scenario planning, and you're thinking about that, those notes will convert when you go to raise real capital. So they're going to impact your cap table, and people need to know what's outstanding, and they will care about some of the terms related to that convertible debt. If there is a discount on how that money will convert into the new round, is there a valuation cap? That all goes into how many preferred shares they're going to get. It all goes back. And I can see Clement back at the board on how he's going to try to talk about this one.
Right. Yeah, Clement, I saw you kind of do a little Jesus move, so I would love to. I'd love to learn a little bit more about why you thought that.
Before Clement goes there, like there are tons of calculators online that can help you get a feel for how these things impact you. Anytime you're going to take on money from an outside investor, again, doing a little bit of homework and recognizing what the impacts are and how it'll affect you down the road is super, super important. Go ahead, Clement.
Go ahead.
The Jesus move was no company should have 5 convertible notes stacked. This is a recipe for disaster. The short of what is happening, and like we speak about damaged cap table. A damaged cap table usually is a byproduct of all these like stacked notes. That's what it is called. Right. Because basically, when you're raising a convertible note or safe, you're actually not pricing your company. You're selling out price later. That's why it's called a cap. It's not a valuation. It's a cap. It's like it's at max. Your company is worth X, but most likely it's going to be worth less. And if it's worth more, it's going to be worth maximum that number. And a lot of first-time founder makes a mistake to mistaken valuation for cap on a convertible note. It doesn't cost me anything to give you a high cap on your convertible note, because you might or might not get there. Just the optics are complex. So the only thing is, and we've seen that plenty of time, unfortunately, with Techstars companies, people having like 5 convertible notes, like they're stacked. And the question is the last one diluting all the one before, or all of them diluting everything at the same time, which is extremely bad for the founders. It's like if you had 5 option pools appearing at the same time before everyone comes. So these are the type of information. There are plenty of questions. I was about to map out how a convertible note is. But
right. Yeah, every time you pick a marker, we all get excited.
I'm happy to. It's pretty simple. It's extremely simple to map all that. But I won't do it because it's going to take too much time.
Yeah, let's go to the next question. So there's a question from Diva here. She asks, are there any free resources for cap table and equity management that the panelists can suggest? I mean, beyond Shoebox, I'm sure you guys have some free calculators.
We have something. We actually have an offer for underrepresented founders, so they get to use the system off the ground for free for their first year. Shoebox is also $180 if you have less than, I think it's 15 stakeholders or whatever. So you're not paying very much per year. There are other tools out there, captable.io. I'm sure people have heard of Carta and other tools that are out there. But there are calculators that are out there and tons of blog posts that are free. Shoebox has a great blog, written a bunch of stuff. These other vendors that I mentioned before, they'll also have a lot of materials out there. There's also like Founders Workbench that good one has. Cooley Go is a great resource for materials around this. But fundamentally, like there's attorneys provide advice, software tools, organize data. I always kind of make a joke. Attorneys are great. They're not Excel jockeys. That's why they're attorneys. So to do the calculations and do some of the math and think through some of the scenarios, the software tools are usually better at visualization. At least that I learned through visualization and like kind of reading some things, getting some of the concepts in place, and then using some of the tools that are out there to help visualize the point around stacking convertible debt. Picking a really low, if they pick a very low valuation cap, and then you're going to raise a lot of money at a high valuation, How are your new investors going to look at that? Are they going to look at it positively, negatively? Why would they think about that stuff? Because everything has an implication. You take money from folks, it'll have an impact to your cap table, and future investors will look at that and see how it impacts their ownership and whether or not it makes sense. In the same way, they're going to look at your CTO's ownership and see whether or not that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, there's another question here about ownership. So is there a rule of thumb? Stefan asks, to how much equity do you allocate for each round of funding? For example, how much percentage do you allocate for friends and family round? I think, Clement, you touched on this a little bit, but if you want to elaborate.
The question shows me that like this is usually the type of question I hear when that's like there isn't a good understanding of what's happening.
Yeah.
So again, you are not allocating your worth whatever the market tells you're worth. So you're not allocating for future round. Every decision happens at a given instant, like founder A, founder B, and your option, and your employees. Like the next round, you do not have to reserve shares, or like your lawyers will do that for you. But this is the next round going to be an additional 20, 30, 10, like all that is going to be decided when you have the discussion. So you do not have to reserve anything. The short is for an angel round, however, like we spoke about comp earlier. So for like the first round, usually it's something around 10 to 15% for the pre-seed, which is like people just betting on you. That means they give you enough money for 9 months each to prove the idea so that you can do something that buys you a year and a half to 2 years of runway. And that's more in the 20% types.
Makes sense. Thank you for that. There's another question here from Bob Fields. He asks, have you seen a situation where founders are crammed down to support incoming executive management? I'm assuming this means like,
yeah.
The question's,
sure.
Yeah.
If the current management team can't handle what's going on and they need some help or whatever, and you're going to you need for whatever reason because of the specialty, or you need to incent the new executives to come in and take on what's required, then it's kind of that same conversation we had earlier. What's the equity that's going to, if we need folks with that experience, what's the equity that they're going to need to feel motivated, right? And to want to take on this opportunity. And then it's that trade-off of like, how much do you need them? How specialized is the skill set, and what do they bring to bear, and what's the potential risk reward there for everyone involved? And that's going to define it. So certainly they may have to take some dilution to make that work.
Right. But definitely you have vesting on for them as well, right?
That should be true for anyone that's coming into the company.
That's right.
Especially the founders. The reason vesting is put together is to protect you and to protect you from the others and the others from you. It's like wearing a mask. Vesting, I promise you, is like wearing a mask. If you don't wear a mask, bad things happen. If you don't put vesting, including on your own shares, only bad things are going to happen, because there is always, no, you don't think your co-founder is going to leave, or no, you don't think you're going to leave. Well, the reason, if there are no vesting, the second you leave, the company is dead.
Yeah. Makes sense.
The rest of the team cannot actually continue and make the shares you have worth something. So that's a protection on both sides.
It's a common problem where people are like, but I'm starting the company. I should own the equity. Like it's my company. And it's like, you're building an idea. You're going to take investment from others. The company is solving a problem, and you're in it, and you have an equity stake, and you're committed. So you shouldn't worry about the vesting.
Yeah.
And life happens. I'll share you like examples of life happening. Like, hey, you're committed, you started the company. Well, what happened next is, hey, there is a death in your family forcing you to relocate somewhere. Real life stuff. We don't want that, but you plan for the worst and hope for the best. Well, you might suddenly be part-time and then need to drop off because you need to take care of that. You spend, however, already 3 years or 2 years getting this idea off the ground. You want other people to continue. That's why you want these people to basically get the chance to continue and get the ball rolling. Other stuff might be, you need to make more money. You go to a bigger job and you get other people to take the risk, etc.
And a lot of early stage founders typically also hire contractors to do some of the work for them. What's your take on compensating contractors with equity? Is that something that you recommend, or you're like, oh no, that's a bad move?
if you're, it's a short-term thing. Like when I think of equity, I think long-term. I think of trying to incent someone to be involved and have ownership for a longer term. If you don't have the cash and you're desperate and you have to do that, like, okay. But I tend to think of equity as I want to use that for folks that I want to keep with the company, to stay with the company, that I want them to feel motivated to try to help me be successful, help the company be successful. That's what I want to use my equity for, not for a short-term project payment, if I can avoid it.
However, having said that, I just pasted a 3-minute video that explains if you have to do it because, hey, I need this new website, I have no money to pay for it. There is a great way to incentivize is, hey, that costed $50,000 to build that website. Well, let's give a credit to that. And in my next round, that is going to be brought in as if that was an investment for $50,000. And there is actually plenty of stuff on how that works. And you might want people to pay and to move. Anyway, like that video in 3 minutes is going to explain you everything on how to make your contractors extremely happy if you end up paying for equity. The bad way to pay for equity is to give an option grant. The good way to pay for equity for service is to treat that as if that was an investment in your future rounds.
That makes sense. Yeah, if you have access to that resource, Clement,
it's on the chat.
Oh, great. The other big question is about IP, right? Like right from the get-go, you're talking about your core idea with a lot of these individuals, with your founders, with your early employees, and IP is huge. And I know, Jason, you mentioned that IP assignment and agreements around that are really important right in the get-go. Can you touch a little bit upon IP and how you make sure that it stays protected?
Yeah, like there are standard agreements to do that. As folks kind of come into the fold and they're going to do work for you, you need them to sign an IP agreement. Otherwise, you're going to have problems down the line because they didn't actually assign their IP to the company. They still own what they work on, and that's one of the core documents. When you're going to hire somebody, there's an offer letter that summarizes the relationship and some of that stuff, but you need a good IP assignment agreement that they're going to sign off on. Sometimes it's a confidentiality and IP assignment agreement. There's a couple different names for it, but they need to assign the work that they're doing to the company, and that needs to happen up front before they really start doing any real work for your organization to make sure that you own everything that they're going to do, that you're going to compensate them for.
Makes sense. And what happens in situations when this person or employee, whoever ends up leaving the company, and 2 years down the line, they create something that's your competition? Is there a way to protect that?
So you signed it, they assigned it to the company. You at least have the ability to try to do the court thing or whatever, but at least from they're not going to be. You want to build something that's defensible, that it's not so easy that they can go out 2 years later, just copy it and go after you. The reason why you're doing the IP assignment is so once you're a $1 billion company, they're not going to come knocking on the door being like, I deserve 10% of this thing because I was there on that Tuesday in the lab and we had this conversation and it was actually my idea from the beginning. It's really hard. That's a tough, you don't want to be in that position.
The short is, don't make things weird, don't make things complex. The reality, if that's that easy that someone copies the stuff and goes off, you probably have missed something. Don't spend time suing the person, just go and keep building. Like as a startup, it's not about protecting yourself, it's about maximizing for the upsides. So that's probably the biggest lesson I've learned in my career so far is maximize for the upside and don't be hung up on the small details while doing everything by the book and being respectful and thoughtful and having this IP agreement, since this is what is expected by the people who are going to fund your company.
Awesome. There's another question here from the audience where Sadia asks, can you introduce attorneys for early stage startups? Do you recommend any attorneys?
Go ahead.
Yeah, there are a number of great early stage attorneys in the Boston area. I think there are Goodwin's a great firm in town, but they're on the higher end, of course. And if you can afford really that kind of counsel, I think it's great if you're going after that. There are folks like Morse Barnes Brown. That's a regional firm that has some great folks there that are focused on startups. But at the end of the day, like you're trying to find someone that you can trust and have a relationship with and doesn't feel like they're that it's like a tax on their time. You want someone that actually is somewhat excited about what you're doing, that you feel like is going to be a partner for you as you're getting this off the ground.
Yeah.
I don't know, Clement, if you have something specific that you want to
I'm actually pasting the name. So you mentioned Goodwin. Jared Fine over there is fantastic, and has been like a great lawyer for is representing about a third of all the Techstars company. At Paul Cinelli, formerly Fully Hog, like Privitanoir is representing about 50% of all the Techstars company. Cooley is amazing. There are local ones. The only thing when you choose a lawyer, it's like choosing an accountant is, are you representing other startups or am I the first one? They'll never tell you that they are the first one, but at the very least ask them and ask to speak to them. And so that's like, what type of financing do you do? Like I have had nightmare meeting amazing company from Western Mass, from Maine, from Rhode Island that were represented by lawyers who didn't know what a convertible note was. And as such, I made so many mistakes and had made everything so complex. So you need to work with people. The short is your incorporation, that's about $3,000 that they might most likely waive. Incorporation plus the initial equity. A round of funding is about $5,000, and in some cases they can do it for $1,000 to $2,000. And lawyers only make money when you're a Series A and later, or after your funding round. So their entire thing is they're going to give you a ton of free advice before, with respect to the situation. So that's why Cooley also could Cooley go. They don't make money on that; they make money when you're big. Startup lawyers bet on helping you to get to that stage.
Yeah, that's good.
And I'll reinforce, get the strategic advice. A lot of those pieces are form docs. There are tools like Shoebox that can automate getting the signatures and making sure that stuff is kind of tied up tight and automatically organized. Your attorney is not your secretary. They're representing public companies in a lot of instances, and they're very highly valued folks that have some great insights for you. But you have to take a certain amount of responsibility yourself in managing your company. Makes
sense. Thank you for that. Benjamin has a comment here. He recommends Feinberg Hansen, and they've offered him help with cap table reconstruction and recapitalization. So anybody who needs some contact, Benjamin recommends Feinberg Hansen. There's an interesting question from Katya here. What do you do if you make a mistake with co-founders who are not producing after 3 months, assuming no agreements have passed hands? That's a good question.
So at the very least, if you don't want lawyers, put at the very least in an email and clarify with the concept of cliff, which is the idea of it's like jumping off a cliff. The first year you jump off the cliff and then you continue. And so if that after 3 months, have the hard discussion. I recommend a beautiful book called Crucial Conversations, or prepare the discussion and have a very gentle but fact-based, hey, here are all the expectations I had. It is not working right now. Let's stop working. Let's stop working with each other. So it's better earlier than later, and don't fire someone after 11 months and 2 weeks. This is bad practice to avoid the cliff. It is legal, but it is extremely bad practice. So if you need to fire someone at the cliff, you have about 10 months to do it.
Right. And the conversation will never get easier.
No matter how many times you have it, right?
It's never going to get easier, and the longer you wait, it only gets worse. If there's a problem, it's time to hit it head on. You need to talk about it as soon as you realize there's an issue. Do not wait.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got about 7 minutes left. Jason, Clement, any last minute kind of final points? If each one of you could give maybe 2 final takeaways for the audience from your experience and the collective experience, what would those be?
I would say you want to surround yourself with good mentors and have a good support system. Building a company is a tough process, and it can be lonely at times. So making sure you have some folks, ideally, that have been on the journey before, that can give you some of, even for all the stuff that we're talking about, they're going to have seen it and they will have a perspective, and having those folks near you is incredibly valuable. And the other thing specific to this topic is again, spend a little bit of time to make sure that you understand the foundations of these concepts. either reading a book or the blog posts or whatever, make sure that you have that foundation, because at the end of the day, this is the stuff you're going to get paid on. Everyone's going to tell you that you got to focus on your business and figure out your ICP or get your unit economics right. That's all true. But if the equity stuff is messed up, you're going to pay for it later, and you might as well get that under control to make sure all your work's going to pay off.
Awesome.
I agree with all that. I was about to say mentorship and all that. Like, ask other people, ask other founders, because we've all seen that, we've all made mistakes, we've all learned from that. My sole advice would be, after having done that for a bunch of time, is don't make it complex. Like, genuinely, don't make it complex. Keep everything simple. Don't make it weird. Don't make it complex. The reality is, if that grow, nothing matters. If you're successful, the fact that you were stingy of someone to give them like half of a point versus a point doesn't matter, or vice versa. Like just simple, and most things actually don't matter when you're successful. Optimize for being successful. Don't spend too much time on dwelling on topics like that.
One of the reasons why Shoebox was actually built was out of, and my initial investor, Steve Papa, who's involved in a bunch of companies behind Toast and all that stuff. Like, the reason why Shoebox got built is because, you know what, this stuff shouldn't be so complex.
Right.
So as long as you're following that yellow brick road and using standard activities and documents, and that's why we built Shoebox, is because they should be standard. It should be repeatable. It shouldn't be rocket science, and it should be available for everyone to be able to focus on building their business, but have a good, solid source of information and automation to be able to get the foundation right.
Right. And my recommendation is, if you can't get anything from Shoebox, you can always have these chalkboard sessions with Clement. I call them chalkboard sessions with Clement, even though he uses a marker. And I think
I had the orange one ready to highlight other stuff, but that's going to be for another time.
No, gentlemen, this is such a great kind of time. I know I've learned a lot. If anybody has any last minute questions they want to get in, feel free. We've still got about 3 minutes left. So any burning question, there's no wrong questions here. Feel free to interrupt and just ask away, because this is what these sessions are for.
While we're waiting for the question, can I do a shameless plug? So
Sure.
Right now, I'm looking for an amazing person to help me grow this company. So that's a founder associate. That's someone like who wants to learn all that firsthand, who's going to be working with me, with all the founding team, to own all the key projects of the company. So I'm going to paste here the job description. It's someone who's going to learn from all that firsthand. So if you're excited by all this topic, if you're excited about finance, if you're excited about learning the founder journey for a year in that's the equivalent of a chief of staff. So like, would love you have the link in the chat session.
Yeah.
So the goal is that this person then goes on after a year and starts their own company or grow with us. So, and that person will discuss about equity with this person. So.
Whiteboard markers optional. Ashley, I know we're coming up on time. Any last minute questions or comments that you want to add on to?
No, I think this was a fantastic way to round out Startup Boston Week 2021.
Woohoo! Perfect. Well, if anybody has any questions, I think we have everyone's email and contact and LinkedIn available. So yeah, feel free to shoot any one of us a message. I'm in the early stages, just as all of you. So if you want a perspective from an early stage founder, feel free to contact me. I'm still learning as I'm going about this journey as well. So
Sid, there was a great question that was just asked by Raymond and them, which was like, can you share any investor resource for healthcare industry? So there is actually something that needs to be acknowledged. There is like here, like the startup Boston is like, it's a very tech focused discussion and tech equity focused. Then there's a life science world where equity is shared in a very different manner, and even the comp that I shared on investor are very different. It's not unusual for a Series A investor to sometimes get 70% of the company, but it's totally healthy because the amount of money we're discussing are very, very different. And then there's the healthcare that lives in between both, where the comps are like can be skewed differently, or where it's okay to give to scientific advisor, medical advisors, like high digits, like 5 points, 10 points of equities that you wouldn't see in the tech ecosystem per se. Like to know this. So please speak to other founders in your industries. There's nothing more powerful than speaking to a peer. Through Startup Boston, I help you network and meet others. Whether go to CIC Boston, Venture Lane. There are so many of these places, or ask other founders who should I meet with. This is probably the most important part.
Absolutely. No, thanks for answering that. Somebody Orly asks, Jason, what was the name of the book that you recommended again?
Venture Deals by Brad Feld.
Venture Deals, Be Smarter Than Your Lawyer and Your Venture Capitalist. That's the title overall.
Full title.
Really worth it. Every single managing director at Techstars, we read it. I've read it probably 5 times at this point in my life. Every founder read it. And there is an online course of it. Honestly, Brad, in terms of content, is probably one of the there are investors who read it. Nobody knows all the details. They read it, they refer it. So don't worry. This is a good resource.
It's a great resource.
All right, well, 10 seconds left. Well, thank you everyone for joining. We really appreciate it. And thank you, Startup Boston. This is amazing. Thank you, all of you, for organizing this for all of us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.